Now give the floor to Ms. Edem Wosornu.
Madam President, I welcome the update of Hans on recent political developments in Yemen. Before I proceed, allow me to also express my deep sadness at the terrible loss of one of our World Food Programme colleagues, Moayed Hamidi, who was brutally killed in an attack in Turba in Taiz Governorate on 21st July. Another colleague was injured in the attack. Moayed's death is an immense tragedy for his family, friends, colleagues, and the entire humanitarian community. We send our sincerest condolences to all who knew him. We call for a comprehensive investigation into the attack and for those behind it to be held accountable. Mere days from World Humanitarian Day, we pay tribute to Moayed's dedication to his work and to the communities he served in Yemen and in many other countries, a dedication espoused by so many humanitarians around the world. This attack and others like it show just how real the threats to the safety and security of aid workers are, from violence to kidnapping, harassment, misinformation, and disinformation. Humanitarians stand with those in need in their darkest hour. They are not and should never be a target. Madam President, I want to also take the opportunity today to discuss two of the most critical components of our humanitarian response: access and funding. I'll turn to those momentarily. But first, one issue on which we have seen extraordinary progress recently, as the Special Envoy said, is the UN's efforts to address the catastrophic environmental threat posed by the FSO Safer. On 1st August, the Smith salvage team completed the ship-to-ship transfer of more than 1 million barrels of oil from the FSO Safer to replacement vessel, the Yemen. This is the culmination of years of tireless advocacy, collaboration, and innovative problem solving. It is a significant milestone, and again, I also commend the Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, David Gressly, and the United Nations Development Programme for stepping up and taking on this colossal task. However, the work does not stop here. We must now complete the second phase of the operation in accordance with our agreements with the relevant authorities. To do so, the United Nations needs to urgently close the $22 million funding gap. I encourage the international community to help us complete this important work. In another piece of good news, we are delighted to have finally seen the release last week of 5 United Nations staff members who were kidnapped in Abyan Governorate 18 months ago. Our colleagues are receiving support. We are very grateful to all member states and other interlocutors who were engaged in these efforts, including some who are in this chamber, such as the government of Yemen and the United Arab Emirates. However, other United Nations staff remain in detention in Sana'a, and we demand their immediate release. Madam President, over the course of this year, the humanitarian community has pushed to increase its presence in previously underserved areas across the country. Just this month, the United Nations undertook an assessment mission to Rahma Governorate with a view to increasing our operational capacity in this area. I am sorry to report, however, that the broader access picture remains bleak. Misinformation and disinformation against humanitarians are on the rise across Yemen. making our work more dangerous and more difficult than it already is. And despite the collective and concerted efforts of the humanitarian community, we have seen limited progress in efforts to expand our operations, our operating space this year. Aid workers continue to experience attempted interference in all stages of humanitarian activities, as well as extensive movement restrictions, which particularly impact our women national staff and all those they serve. We continue to engage with both the de facto authorities and the government of Yemen to chart a way forward to resolve these issues. I renew our call to the parties to fulfill their obligations to facilitate the rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief efforts for all people in need. Madam President, in 2023, humanitarians aim to provide support to more than 17 million people in need across the country. However, our work, this important work, is being severely hampered by critical funding shortages. Nearly 8 months into the year, Yemen's humanitarian response plan has received $1.3 billion out of the $4.34 billion. It has received only 31% of what is needed. While we are grateful to the generosity of our donors, major shortfalls across all sectors in Yemen mean programs and services are having to be cut or scaled back. The World Food Programme recently announced a suspension of its malnutrition prevention activities across Yemen, starting from August, with more cuts expected in the coming months if funds are not urgently received. In July, we received reports from humanitarian partners that only 1 in 5 children targeted for severe acute malnutrition support in Al-Jauf Governorate were getting the assistance they need. The cost of inaction for these children, for many other people across the country, is steep. I urge the international community not to lose sight of the progress made in improving humanitarian outcomes across Yemen and how easily this could be reversed. Madam President, while access and funding are necessary areas of focus in the short term, we must also work to address the long-term drivers of humanitarian needs. Of particular concern is the country's failing economy. Public services remain fractured and unreliable. Protests in Aden and surrounding governorates over recent weeks have intensified in the wake of extensive power outages and a currency that continues to decline. Economic hostilities continue to have devastating consequences for millions of people across Yemen, already struggling to make ends meet. In the absence of a resumption of oil exports, blocked due to threats by the de facto authorities, government revenue will continue to dwindle and service provision will falter. Ongoing trade obstructions will continue to drive the cost of basic goods even further out of reach. We condemn these actions by the de facto authorities, which serve to compound the misery of so many people in Yemen. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia recently announced $1.2 billion in budget support for the government of Yemen, which will help to keep the power supply on and salaries paid. The disbursement of this generous support cannot come too soon. This alone, however, will not be enough to bring Yemen's economy back from the brink of collapse. Madam President, it is vital to make progress on a political resolution of this conflict, as the Special Envoy has said. But let me be clear also, a political solution alone will not solve the humanitarian crisis. Only when such progress is pursued together with improved economic conditions and the reestablishment of essential services will we see humanitarian needs begin to decrease. In light of donor projections that there will be much less humanitarian funding available next year, collective action is needed to address these drivers now, or we may see needs increase at a time when we will not be able to respond to them. The humanitarian community stands ready to play its part in this work. In the meantime, we'll continue to do everything we can to support those most in need in Yemen, no matter who, no matter where, no matter what. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Wosornu for her briefing. I now give the floor